Ladies and gentlemen, we are live again. We are getting closer to the fights tonight. Bellator MMA. I just provided my preview and prediction for Juan Archuleta versus Patchy Mix, Buffalo's own Patchy Mix, fighting for a world title tonight. Very much looking forward to that fight. Also, very much looking forward to the news that I'm about to dive into for the first time on this show. I have not taken a dive into the whole rumor mill of the pending return of one Nick Diaz. I was shocked when I pulled up the greatest, worst invention ever, the smartphone, and saw and saw that Nick Diaz and his management team posted videos of Nick training, working out. He looks like he is in phenomenal shape. He looked very lean, very cut. He looked very good physically. He looked like Nick Diaz back in the Strikeforce days when Nick Diaz was just ripping through the opposition like a hot knife through butter and was one of the more entertaining fighters in the world at that time. That was 10 years ago. And 10 years ago in fight history is a long, long time ago because things change in the fight game so rapidly. So many times we have talked about this. We've thought about this. Is Nick Diaz coming back? Will he come back? Is Nick Diaz returning to the UFC? And, when I last saw Nick Diaz in a high profile interview, I thought to myself, man, I don't think he's ever coming back. He just didn't seem like he was in the right, dare I say, mental state to fight again. It took a lot out of him. It took a heavy mental toll to carry that Diaz torch for not just himself, but for his brother, as well as his training partners, Jake Shields and Gilbert Melendez. Nick Diaz was the guy. He was the name of those four guys. Gilbert Melendez was trying to become a champ in Strikeforce. Jake Shields was a name in Strikeforce, not a champion just yet. But Nick Diaz didn't have to be a champion to be a champion. And what I mean by that is Nick Diaz was a champion for how he fought. He was able to entertain. He could fight fighters like Paul Daly. You watch that fight. I guarantee you, if you don't come away with the hairs on your neck standing up, the hairs on your arms standing up, you're not human. I mean, that fight was a blitzkrieg for the 2-3 minutes that fight sequence lasted. It was a war of a fight, and that just goes to show you the style that Nick Diaz brought and the style that Nick Diaz was able to captivate an audience with, whether you were a fan of the UFC, Strikeforce, WEC, Pride, any of the big organizations in MMA at that time. Throughout those years that Nick Diaz was in his younger years, you knew where Nick Diaz was fighting. You knew if he was fighting in Strikeforce, you knew if he was fighting in the UFC, you knew where Nick Diaz was fighting and who he was fighting. The only time anyone really knew who that guy was is if he was fighting Nick Diaz. It didn't matter who Nick Diaz was fighting. You were tuning in. And my other thought is that when we used to think of the Diaz brothers, Nick came to mind first and then Nate. Now that has changed. And that goes to show you how things change so rapidly in the fight game that, yeah, the Diaz brothers, Nick was the guy that was really famous first. And then obviously Nate took it to a completely bigger level by taking on Conor McGregor on short notice, beating Conor McGregor on short notice, and becoming the mega superstar that he is today. Alex Lopacolo, what's up, buddy? He says, who do you think he's fighting? Well, I'm going to dive into that. It's a good question, but I'm definitely going to dive into that. So stay tuned. I'm diving into that right now. So, when we used to think of the Diaz brothers, we would think of Nick, and rightfully so. He was the man at that time. We always wondered what would happen if Nick Diaz fought George St. Pierre. We found out. George was able to dominate him via the wrestling, take him down. I think he took him down like 12, 13 times in that fight. We saw some entertaining bouts from Nick against BJ Penn. We saw the boxing acumen that he displayed at the mixed martial arts level in fights like that. And we also saw Nick Diaz take on, a first run in the UFC. We saw a first run, and then he went to Strikeforce, did his thing over there, and then went back into the UFC. But to answer Alex's question, I have multiple opponents for who I believe Nick Diaz should fight next. And I just put Diaz, but I'm talking about Nick. Nate, there's rumblings that Nate is going to fight Jorge Masvidal again, and I'm all for that. I think that's awesome. I hated the way that first BMF title ended. That BMF title fight, it should have ended with a more definitive conclusion than that. People are saying, oh, well, Jorge Masvidal was piecing up Nate. Yeah, but a lot of people have pieced up Nate, only for Nate to come back. So pump the brakes on that one. I want to see that fight again. The first fighter that I think deserves an opportunity to take on Nick Diaz, because Nick Diaz has not fought in 5 years. And Nick Diaz hasn't won a fight in like forever. It's been more than 5, more than 6. It's been like 7 years, I feel like, since Nick Diaz has won a fight. So, you're not going to put Nick Diaz in there against anybody in the top 5 under this plan. I like to play matchmaker a lot. And when I play matchmaker, I want to put on a fight that the fans would want to see. I want to put on a fight that's maybe happened already way in the past. And a fight that makes sense to me is Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler 2. Now, as I go down the gauntlet as to why I think Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler should fight again, I say to myself, okay, Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler could fight 99 times, and I'd watch it every freaking time. There's no doubt about that. Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler fought back when Robbie Lawler was in his first run in the UFC, back when Nick Diaz was in his first run in the UFC, and it is one of the more notorious clips, pun intended, of two fighters in their younger years going at it, only for Nick Diaz to kind of show everybody who he was at that time, a trash talker, a guy that could get his opponent to fight emotionally, only to make them look really stupid. And that's what took place in that exchange in the original Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler fight. That was back when the UFC was really trying to get its legs underneath it. And that was back when the UFC was fighting in casinos, Pearl Palms, Trump, Taj Mahal, all that stuff. And Nick Diaz was able to win that fight. And it was a really big win for him because the ruthless one, Robbie Lawler, was looked at as this young, hungry, up-and-coming contender. And now both of these guys have had championship runs. Nick had a championship run in Strikeforce. Robbie became the UFC welterweight champion and put on some of the best fights ever. In my opinion, the best fight arguably ever in mixed martial arts was Robbie Lawler versus Roy McDonald 2. And I don't know how many fights Robbie Lawler's got in him like that, but I'd surely be amped up to see him fight Nick Diaz. I would love to see that fight. We got some comments on here. Jean-Francois, what's up, my man? Yeah, Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler 2. That's the first one. There's a long backstory between those two guys. And both guys, Robbie Lawler has been on the losing end. He lost to Neil Magny. He lost to Colby Covington. And obviously he lost his belt to Tyron Woodley. And if Nick Diaz wants to come back and he feels like he wants to make a run at this thing, the results of the Colby Covington-Tyron Woodley fight, win or lose, I think if Colby Covington wins that fight, which I think ultimately Colby Covington will win that fight, in my opinion, just give you a little bit of a brief, pick 'em for that. I think Colby Covington will get that win. If Colby Covington doesn't get the win, even if he does get the win, either way, I think the fight that I want to see next, if Nick and Robbie 2 doesn't happen, will be Nick Diaz versus Tyron Woodley. There's a backstory to this fight, which Ariel Helwani dove into that a little bit. And that's another thought that came into my mind when I thought of who Nick Diaz should fight. Tyron Woodley was a Strikeforce welterweight contender once upon a time. Tyron Woodley was trying to climb the Strikeforce welterweight ladder while Nick Diaz was the champ. And when Nick Diaz went to the UFC, Tyron Woodley went to the UFC too, and Tyron was begging Dana White and company to make that fight a reality, and it never came to fruition. Tyron Woodley is a little bit long in the tooth now. I haven't liked what I've seen from Tyron in his last two fights. Safe to say, Tyron Woodley has literally lost, really put this in perspective for you guys, Tyron Woodley has lost 2 straight 5-round world main event fights, not world title fights, but one of them was a world title fight. The next one was a 5-round main event. He lost both of those fights 5-0. So yes, Tyron Woodley has lost 10 consecutive rounds in his mixed martial arts career and does not look like he is willing to pull the trigger as eagerly as he once did back in the day, like he did in the Strikeforce days. But if there's anybody that could get you to get out of bed in the morning, it is Nick Diaz, because Nick Diaz is that name. He's that guy that brings the attention to your fight. Just on name value alone, Nick Diaz doesn't need to have trash talking ability. Nick Diaz sells on its own. Just the name, Nick Diaz. You know what you're going to get with a Nick Diaz fight. So, yeah, I think that fight makes sense. And I think Tyron Woodley wants it still. And who wouldn't want it? I mean, that's a name in Nick Diaz that, people appreciate and people want to see fight. So throw a comment down. Let me know what you guys think, because I think that this is a really important topic. Because to be quite honest with you, I didn't think this was ever going to happen. I didn't think Nick Diaz would ever come back to the fight game. I thought he was done. I mean, come on, thinking it through. This is nuts. A fighter being out of the fight game for this long, only to come back and wondering who's next for him when he hasn't fought in 5 years. I mean, George took a 4-year retirement, came back, won the middleweight belt, rode off into the sunset. But with Nick Diaz, it's a little bit different. And I say that with a little bit of a fear. I have to say that I hope he is coming back for the right reasons. I hope Nick Diaz is coming back for the sole purpose that he wants to win, he wants to compete, he wants to ultimately climb that welterweight ladder again and win the UFC title. I hope he's not coming back for the reasons of just because he doesn't really have anything else to do. Because if that's the case, I think the effort training-wise might be there, but the fighter ability that was once there might not be there. Again, we might not see that, patented Nick Diaz, Nate Diaz as well, style that we are accustomed to seeing. And I don't want to see Nick Diaz come back and be a shell of himself. I want to see Nick Diaz come back strong. I want to see Nick Diaz come back and inspire some people that said he wasn't going to do it, saying that he's shot, that he's done. That's the Nick Diaz that I want to see. The last fight that I think makes sense, the third and final fight that I think makes sense for Nick Diaz, is Nick Diaz versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Wonderboy is coming off of a devastating loss to Anthony Showtime Pettis, and Wonderboy needs a fight to bring him back in terms of his notoriety. Wonderboy needs a fight that will prop him up if he gets that win or if he loses. Wonderboy needs a big fight. I think he deserves a big fight. He's represented himself well. He's represented the sport well. And ultimately, I go back and I watch that tape on that Anthony Pettis Wonderboy fight. He was winning that fight against Anthony Pettis prior to taking that hellacious Superman punch. And it just caught him on the butt. I mean, it was just such an unlucky set of circumstances that, it's really tough for me to really put that one on Wonderboy when he was winning that fight in pretty dominant fashion prior to that fight ending that way, if I might add. So Nick Diaz, Wonderboy Thompson. We've seen Nick Diaz battle Carlos Condit. That was a great fight. We've seen Nick Diaz battle Paul Daly in Strikeforce. I touched on that. the striking matchup between a Nick Diaz type fighter and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, this karate elusive fighter, I think would be fantastic. And I think that it's a matchup that would really be a great fight, just stylistically. So that's like my stylistic Thomas Take matchup. Nick Diaz and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. That's the fight that I really like in terms of just the styles and how the styles make fights. We know that styles make fights. So, those are the three right there. Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler 2, Nick Diaz versus Tyron Woodley, and Nick Diaz versus Wonderboy Thompson. And those are the fights that I think make the most sense for Nick. And I'm hoping, like I said, I'm hoping that he's coming back for the right reasons. I want to see him back in there for the right reasons. I want to see Nick Diaz back inside the cage, ready to let these hands go on anyone that doubts him. That's the Nick Diaz that I loved. So you guys stay safe, take care, enjoy the fights. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Below you see the ticker, right? It gets your attention. I hope so. It says subscribe and like the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on YouTube and Facebook. I really appreciate it. I want to interact with more of the viewers and listeners, and I can do that on here by having you guys throw down a video comment and follow me on all these platforms. Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. Facebook, Thomas Take Sports Podcast. It's everywhere. It's on every platform. You can tune in. Plenty of awesome guests on the way in the next, 4 or 5 weeks. I get the whole schedule laid out. So tune in. Make it happen. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Stay safe. Enjoy the fights. Can't believe I'm saying this, but it looks like Nick Diaz is making a comeback.